Hey, quick welcome. This is an original TalesSphere story, and today we're jumping right into it.
My 8-year-old adoptive daughter wrote a poem for my father's 60th birthday about love for her new family. My dad snatched her card and barked, "We'll never be your family. I wish you'd stayed in the orphanage." I didn't shout. I stood up and said this. The room went silent. 2 nights before my dad's 60th birthday, Olivia took over our kitchen table like it was her office. She had lined paper, a purple glitter pen, and a little pile of crumpled drafts that looked like snowballs. "Read the new one?" she asked, holding the page with both hands so it wouldn't shake. I listened while she tried to make the words sound grown-up. Then she frowned and scratched out a whole line. "No, that part sounds fake." She stared at me hard. "Does Grandpa hate fake?" I kept my voice steady. "Grandpa likes the truth." She nodded like that solved everything and started rewriting again. After a few minutes, she slid the page back to me. "I put family in it," she said quietly. "Is that allowed?" I looked at her little jaw set like she was bracing for a no. "It's allowed," I told her. "It's true." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all week, then whispered, "I just want him to know I'm good." She was trying to earn a place she already had. Saturday afternoon in Columbus, my dad's house smelled like sheet cake and lemon cleaner, and the living room was crowded with balloons that said 60 in gold. My sister, Melissa, had already parked herself by the couch with her kids, Evan, 9, and Sophie, 7, like she owned the best seats. Dad was in his recliner, grinning at them like they were the whole show. Evan handed him a gift bag and Dad boomed, "That's my boy!" Sophie climbed right onto his knee and he kissed the top of her head. Olivia stood beside me with her handmade card pressed to her chest, waiting for someone to notice she existed. Melissa glanced at her and smiled the way you smile at a cashier. "Hey, Olivia," she said, then turned back to her kids. Dad gave Olivia a quick nod. Polite. Nothing warm. "Hello." When it was time for cards, Olivia stepped forward, cheeks pink, and cleared her throat. "I wrote something," she said, and her eyes flicked to me for permission. I nodded. She read in a soft, careful voice. "Dear Grandpa, you're 60. That's big and true. You tell stories and fix things and make pancakes too. I didn't have a grandpa before, but now I do. Thank you for my new family. I love you." Dad's smile tightened like someone pulled a string behind it, and he didn't clap. For half a second after Olivia finished, the room stayed quiet like it was waiting for an adult to tell it what to do next. Olivia held out the card with both hands, the way she'd practiced, her eyes wide and hopeful. Dad leaned forward, took the card, too fast, too sharp, and his face went sour. He didn't read it again. He snapped it right out of her hands and barked, "We'll never be your family. I wish you'd stayed in the orphanage." Then he tossed the card onto the coffee table. The words hit the room like a dropped plate, loud, final, impossible to pretend you didn't hear. Olivia's mouth opened, but no sound came at first. Then her face crumpled and the crying started. The kind that's more air than voice because the body can't figure out how to breathe. Melissa stared at her lap. Evan looked at the TV like it might rescue him. Sophie slid off Dad's knee and froze. Dad sat back like he'd just said the weather, like he'd done a favor by being honest. Nobody moved, so I did. I was already beside Olivia before my brain caught up. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her against me, her little shoulders shaking like she'd been dropped into cold water. "Hey," I said low, right into her hair. "Look at me. You're okay." She tried to wipe her face with her sleeve and choked out, "I'm sorry. I'll fix it." That sentence made something harden in my chest. 8 years old, and her first instinct was to make herself smaller so the room would feel comfortable again. Dad cleared his throat like her crying was inconvenient. Melissa finally murmured, "Dad," but it came out thin, like she was worried about his feelings more than Olivia's. Dad waved a hand. "Don't start," he said. "She needs to understand reality." Olivia clung tighter to my shirt and whispered, "I won't call him Grandpa anymore." I held her and stared straight at my father, and I could feel exactly how alone she was in that room. Her tears soaked through my sleeve. Dad shifted in his recliner and tried to smooth his face into something that could pass as reasonable. "Listen," he said, leaning forward like he was about to give a speech. "I didn't mean to upset her, but I'm not going to lie. I'm tired of everyone expecting me to pretend." I didn't answer yet. I kept my hand on Olivia's back, slow circles because she was still shaking. Dad kept talking anyway. "She's been here what, 6 months? That's not family. That's a situation. It takes time." He nodded at the card like it was evidence. "And all this talk about love? It feels rehearsed. It feels fake. She should wait until she actually means it." Olivia lifted her head just enough to hear that word, fake, and she flinched like she'd been slapped. Dad added, almost kindly, "It's not personal. It's just honesty. People need honesty." Melissa let out a little laugh like she was trying to lighten it. Okay, Dad. Let's just..." But Dad wasn't looking for lighter. He was looking for permission. His apology had teeth. Dad reached for the cake knife, like that could reset the room. "Let's move on," he said, too brisk. "It's my birthday. We're not turning this into drama." Olivia's face was still wet against my shoulder, and my stomach felt strangely calm, like something had clicked into place. I stood up slowly with Olivia still pressed to me. Everyone's eyes tracked me like I'd become the new problem. Dad looked relieved, like he assumed I was going to do what I always did. Make it smooth, make it quiet, make it okay. I looked at him and said, very evenly, "Since everyone here loves honesty so much..." The words landed and the room went still, even the kids. Melissa's smile slipped. Dad's eyebrows lifted, like he didn't recognize my tone. I kept Olivia tucked against my side, picked up her little jacket from the chair, and reached for my purse. Dad opened his mouth, but nothing came out fast enough. And that's when I stood up. Olivia was silent in the back seat on the drive home, her sneakers tucked under her like she was trying to take up less space. The streetlights flashed across her face in the rearview mirror, and every time they did, I saw her swallow hard like she was holding her crying in with her throat. "Mom?" she finally whispered, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to use that word anymore. "Did I do something bad?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I kept my voice low and steady. "No, you did something brave. You wrote the truth." She stared out the window. He said I should have stayed." She couldn't finish it. I didn't fill in the sentence for her. I just said, "He was wrong." And I meant it in the plainest way, like stating a fact. At the next red light, I reached back and let her hold 2 of my fingers. She grabbed them like a lifeline. As I drove, the shock started turning into something sharper, and I realized this wasn't just about one ugly moment. It was about a pattern I'd been trained to survive. Because my father didn't wake up cruel that day. When I was 10, my mom died, and the house went quiet in a way that never fully lifted. My sister Melissa was 7, small enough that people still called her the baby, and my dad's grief turned into rules. The first rule was unspoken. Melissa needed protecting. The second rule was said out loud. I needed to help. The morning of my mom's funeral, Dad stood in the hallway with a black tie in his hands and looked right past my face. "Kate," he said, "get your sister dressed. Make sure she eats something." Melissa sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, while relatives stroked her hair and told her she was so strong. No one told me anything except what needed doing. That became the rhythm. Melissa forgot homework. I drove it over. Melissa didn't want to do dishes, Dad said. "Kate, just handle it." When I complained, he'd sigh like I was making his life harder. "Be mature," he'd say. "Don't add to my stress." I learned to cook because nobody else was going to. I learned to swallow words because they didn't change outcomes. I became the helper, not the kid. By the time we were adults, Melissa had a husband, 2 kids, and the kind of confidence that comes from always being caught when you fall. Dad adored being a grandpa to Evan and Sophie. He coached Evan's little league, showed up to Sophie's dance recitals with flowers, and kept framed school photos on his mantle like trophies. I lived across town and worked full-time, but Sundays were still family day. That meant Melissa dropped her kids off with me for a couple of hours that turned into the whole afternoon. I'd take them to Dad's, cook, and supervise while he hosted the big Sunday dinner without actually cooking or watching anyone. He'd call it tradition. "Family takes care of family," he'd say, and everyone acted like that sentence was a gift instead of a demand. When Dad's mortgage payment went up a few years back, he called me late at night. "I don't want to worry your sister," he said. "She has her own expenses." Then he paused, like he was waiting for my old training to kick in. It did. I set up a $550 auto payment without even telling Melissa. It felt easier than arguing. It felt like being the mature one again. In our family, love came with an invoice. My husband, Alex, met my dad in person exactly twice before the Army sent him overseas again. Alex is a doctor, smart, steady, the kind of man who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. We tried for kids for years, through appointments and tests, and that slow monthly disappointment that makes you count time differently. One night, after another call with a fertility specialist, Alex sat on a video call from a base clinic half a world away. His scrubs looked wrinkled and his eyes were tired, but his voice was clear. "Kate," he said, "I don't want our life to be a waiting room." I laughed once, sharp and bitter, then stopped because it wasn't funny. I wanted it to happen the normal way, I admitted. He nodded. "Normal isn't guaranteed. Love is a choice." Then he said, "Let's adopt." Like it was the simplest decision in the world. The next day, I printed forms and made a list and took a deep breath, because we weren't choosing easy. We were choosing ours. We chose the hard yes. I met Olivia in a beige office with a box of tissues on the table and a toy bin in the corner. She was sitting with her knees pulled up, clutching a stuffed fox that had one ear bent. Her hair was in 2 neat braids, and her eyes tracked everything like she was measuring the room for exits. When the caseworker introduced us, Olivia didn't smile. She just looked at me, serious, like she was studying whether I meant what I said. I knelt down so I wasn't towering over her. "Hi," I told her. "I'm Kate." She didn't say her name at first. She just whispered, "Do you have rules?" I answered honestly, "Yes, but we talk about them." The first night she slept at our house, she lined up her shoes by the door. The second night, she asked if she was allowed to open the fridge. By the 3rd week, she was correcting me if I called her Sweetie instead of Olivia, because she wanted her name used right. At month 4, she slipped and called me Mom in the grocery store, then froze like she'd broken a law. I just said, "Yep, "That's me," and kept walking so she didn't have to feel embarrassed. 6 months in, we were buried in adoption paperwork. The court date was still months away, and she was writing poems to belong. My dad hated the idea from the start, and he called it honesty, like that made it noble. When I told him we were adopting, he didn't ask about Olivia. He asked, "Why would you do that to yourself?" "She's a child," I said. "Not a punishment." He scoffed. "You're bringing a stranger into your house. If you can't have kids naturally, maybe that's your sign. Just don't have children." Then he added the part he knew would land. "And your husband is gone all the time. You're basically a single mom. This is a bad idea." Alex, listening on speaker from overseas, kept his voice even. "Sir, we're excited." Dad replied, "Don't sir me. You don't understand this family." Then Dad told me, "Don't expect me to play grandpa. Don't push it." I still invited him to his own birthday party with Olivia there, because part of me kept hoping time would soften him. I walked into that party still trying to win his approval. Back in my dad's living room, Olivia's crying had gone quieter, like she was running out of energy to be hurt. Dad reached for the cake again, pretending this was all a small bump. Melissa hovered by the kitchen doorway, eyes darting between us like she wanted someone else to fix it. I kept Olivia tucked against my side and faced my father. "Since everyone loves honesty that much here," I said, calm enough that it didn't sound like a threat, "I'm going to be honest too." Dad leaned back, almost smug, like he thought I was about to apologize for making a scene. I didn't. "Olivia is my daughter," I said, slow and clear. "I love her more than anything. And if you don't see her as family, then I'm no longer your family either." The words didn't shake. They just sat there, heavy, undeniable. Melissa's mouth opened. "Kate!" I cut her off without raising my voice. "Not today." Evan stared at the floor. Sophie looked like she might cry too. Dad's face went blank for a second, like he couldn't compute a boundary that didn't bend for him. I picked up Olivia's card from the coffee table, creased now from his hand, and tucked it into my purse like it was evidence. Then I walked out with my daughter, and no one followed. The door closed behind us like a decision. At home, I got Olivia into pajamas and made her a mug of warm milk with honey, the way my mom used to do before she got sick. Olivia sat at the edge of her bed, twisting the hem of her shirt. Her cheeks were blotchy, but her voice was careful. "Did I break your family?" she asked. "Because if I did, I can fix it. I can say sorry. I can never write poems again." She swallowed and stared at her hands. "If poems make people mad, I don't want poems." I sat beside her and kept my tone steady. "You didn't break anything," I said. "Adults are responsible for adult choices." She shook her head, small and fierce. "But he said I shouldn't have been here. He said I should have stayed where I was." Her eyes went wet again. "What if you change your mind?" I took her hands and held them still. "Olivia," I said, making her look at me, "I have never been more sure about anything. You are my daughter. You are staying." I pointed to the little photo of us on her dresser, the one she picked out herself. "That's us. That's real." She sniffed and whispered, "Then my poem wasn't bad?" I shook my head. "Your poem was love. The problem was him." I tucked her card, the one with the poem, into my nightstand. After Olivia fell asleep, I didn't pour a glass of wine or rant to a friend. I sat at my laptop at the kitchen counter and opened my bank app like I was doing routine chores. The auto payment was there in black and white. $550 to my dad's mortgage account, scheduled like clockwork. I stared at it longer than I needed to. It hit me how many years I'd been quietly holding up his independence while he talked down to my choices. Family to him meant access and control. It meant I paid and stayed quiet. I clicked into the payment details and hit cancel. The app asked, "Are you sure?" Like it was a big dramatic thing. I was sure. I turned off the recurring transfer and watched the confirmation pop up. No fireworks, no sirens, just a line of text saying it wouldn't happen again. Then I made a new transfer, $550 into a savings account labeled adoption fees, because that money belonged to Olivia's future, not my dad's comfort. I closed the laptop, washed one mug in the sink, and went to bed. The $550 leash snapped quietly. Sunday mornings used to be automatic. Melissa would text "on my way" like it was a schedule I'd agreed to forever, and the kids would show up with backpacks and tablets and no real plan. That week, I woke up, made pancakes for Olivia, and let the house stay calm. At 9:07 a.m., Melissa texted, "Be there in 20. We're doing brunch after." I stared at it while Olivia colored at the table, humming like nothing could touch her in this moment. My hands wanted to do the old thing, smooth, accommodate, keep the peace. Instead, I typed, "We're not doing Sundays anymore. Please make other childcare plans." I reread it once to make sure it was factual, not emotional, then hit send. The response came fast. "Are you kidding? Dad already feels bad." Then, "We have plans." Then, "So you're punishing the kids now?" I didn't argue with the texts. I just put my phone face down and helped Olivia find the blue crayon she couldn't locate. A boundary doesn't need a speech. It needs consistency. My calendar finally belonged to us. Melissa called 5 minutes later. I let it ring twice, then answered because I wanted her to hear my voice, not my typing. "Kate," she snapped, "what is wrong with you?" I kept my voice even. "I'm not babysitting today." She made a frustrated noise. "Dad said something stupid. He's old. He apologized." I didn't correct her because we both knew he hadn't apologized in any real way. Melissa pushed on. "My kids love you. You can't just blow up everyone's life because you're sensitive." "I'm not blowing up anything," I said. "I'm protecting my daughter." She scoffed. "Protecting her from what? A comment?" Then she lowered her voice like she was being reasonable. "Kate, you're making it weird. We're family. You can't just—" I cut in, still calm. "I can. And I am." She started to talk over me, faster, louder. "So what? You're going to keep her from Dad forever? That's insane. And what about me? What am I supposed to do today?" "You're supposed to parent," I said, and I hated that I had to say it. There was a pause, then her tone turned icy. "Wow, you've really changed." "I have," I agreed, and ended the call. I hung up before she could rewrite my no. My dad didn't call at first. He texted like a man who assumed money was a button he could push. "Kate, the mortgage draft didn't go through. Fix it tonight." No hello. No mention of Olivia. Just an order. I stared at the message until my jaw unclenched. Then I replied, "I canceled the payment. I won't be supporting your mortgage anymore." I waited, and the typing bubbles popped up like a pulse. His response? "Unbelievable. After everything I did for you." Then, "You're letting your feelings control you." Then, the one that made my stomach go cold. "Don't act like that girl is your family yet. It's not final. You're embarrassing yourself." There it was. He'd found a way to make Olivia temporary again, to make my motherhood conditional. He'd said it like it was a technicality, like paperwork could erase bedtime stories and lunches packed and nightmares soothed. I typed one line back. Do not speak about my daughter again. I walked out of the office, unblocked my dad's number, and called straight to voicemail. Not as a punishment, as a safety measure. He tried to use paperwork as a weapon. Once you set a boundary, the people who benefited from you having none will start recruiting. The calls came from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, an aunt, a cousin, my dad's friend from his bowling league. Each one started with the same script. He's your father, and family is family, and you'll regret this. I didn't yell. I didn't cry on the phone. I kept it simple. He told my child she should have stayed in an orphanage, I said. I'm not discussing this. My aunt sighed like I was being dramatic. He didn't mean it like that. He's just old-fashioned. My cousin tried another angle. Blood matters, Kate. You know that. Then she added, like she was offering a solution. If this is too stressful, maybe you can reconsider. Maybe she'd be better somewhere else. That sentence made everything go quiet inside me. Not rage, not panic, just clarity. Don't ever suggest that again, I said, voice flat. She is my daughter. She is not a trial run. If you can't respect that, you don't get access to us either. There was a stammered apology, but it was too late. I ended the call and blocked the number. Then I did the same to 2 more people without debating myself. I got very calm and very done. A month passed, and our life started to feel like ours again. Olivia stopped watching my face every time the phone buzzed. She started leaving her shoes wherever she felt like instead of lining them up by the door. On Sunday mornings, we went to the library and picked out picture books and one poetry book with a bright yellow cover that she carried like a trophy. Alex called from overseas whenever he could, and instead of me saying, "It's fine," I told him the truth. "It's quiet," I said. "It's better." He didn't ask me to keep the peace. He asked, "What do you need?" Sometimes I needed him to just listen. Sometimes I needed him to email the adoption worker so I didn't have to handle everything alone. One night, Olivia pulled her card back out, creased and smudged, and taped the poem onto the fridge with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. "It's still true," she said simply. I nodded. "It is." I thought the silence meant the message had landed. The quiet held, until it didn't. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything snapped again. I pulled into the pickup line at Olivia's elementary school, like I always did, and waited for her to come bouncing out with her backpack too big for her shoulders. 10 minutes passed. 20. No Olivia. I parked and went to the front office, trying to keep my face calm because kids can smell panic. The secretary smiled politely. "Oh, Olivia was picked up," she said. "Her grandfather came in early." My brain stalled. "Excuse me?" I heard myself say. She pointed at a clipboard. "He signed her out. It's fine. He's on her approved list." My hands went cold as I looked down and saw my father's name in my own handwriting from months ago, back when I still believed he'd eventually be decent, and before it even occurred to me to update the school pickup list. I forced air into my lungs. "What time did he take her?" The secretary answered, cheerful, unaware. "About 15 minutes ago." 15 minutes could be anywhere. I swallowed hard and said, "Remove him. Right now. He is not allowed." My voice must have done something because her smile faded. She nodded quickly and started clicking at her computer. I walked out of the office and tried my dad anyway, straight to voicemail. I called Melissa. No answer. I called Alex, and the second he picked up, I said, "He took her from school." Alex didn't ask questions. He just said, "Drive. I'm staying on the line." I drove like every red light was personal. My dad's driveway was full when I pulled up. Melissa's SUV, my dad's sedan, 2 kids' bikes tossed on the lawn. I didn't knock politely. I rang the bell once and opened the door when Melissa called, "It's open!" like this was a normal visit. Melissa appeared in the hallway, eyebrows already lifted like she was ready to scold me. "Kate, what are you doing?" I walked past her without touching her and went straight to the living room. Olivia was on the carpet, sitting stiff with her hands in her lap. My dad was on the couch, rolling a rubber ball toward her like he was trying to create a wholesome scene.
"Come on, sweetheart,"
he was saying, voice syrupy.
"Grandpa's just playing."
Olivia didn't reach for the ball. Her eyes flicked up to me, wide and shiny, and her whole body shifted like she'd been holding still on purpose. The second she saw me, she stood fast and crossed the room in 3 steps. She grabbed my hand and pressed her face into my side like she needed to be sure I was real. I put my arm around her shoulders and felt how tense she was, like she'd turned into a wire. They had my daughter in their living room. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I looked at my father and said, very clearly, "You took my child from school without telling me." My voice sounded like paperwork, flat, official. Alex's voice was still in my ear through my phone, quiet and controlled. Dad lifted his hands like he was calming a situation he'd created.
"Kate, relax. I'm trying to make things right," he said. "I decided I'm ready to be her grandfather now."
He smiled at Olivia like he expected gratitude.
"See? No hard feelings."
Olivia's grip tightened on my fingers. I angled my body so I was between her and him. "You don't get to be ready by taking her," I said. Melissa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Kate. He picked her up. It's not like he—" "Stop," I cut in, still calm. "You do not take my child. Ever." Dad's smile twitched.
"I was going to call you. I just thought you'd cooled off by now, and I needed to get back to normal."
He glanced at me, and the mask slipped for half a second.
"You can't just cut off the mortgage payment and—"
There it was. Not Olivia's feelings, not the orphanage comment. Normal to him meant money flowing and me obeying. I nodded once, like something had been confirmed. "That's why you won't have access to her," I said. "You don't love her. You want leverage." I took Olivia's backpack from the chair, held her hand, and walked out. Behind me, Dad called,
"Kate!"
like my name was a remote control. It didn't work. Normal was over, and he knew it. 6 months later, we sat in a small courthouse room while an adoption judge smiled at Olivia like she'd been waiting for her. Alex was beside me in a suit that still looked strange on him after all those uniforms, because he'd resigned from his overseas posting and taken a local doctor job so he could be home. Olivia wore a simple dress and held the same stuffed fox, the bent ear now stitched back up because she'd asked Alex to fix it like a real doctor. The judge asked Olivia if she understood what today meant. Olivia nodded hard. "It means I'm staying," she said, then glanced at me. "Forever?" The judge laughed softly and stamped the papers, and that sound, ink meeting official paper, felt like a door locking from the inside. At home, Olivia still writes poems. She writes them about pancakes and school buses and our dog's weird habit of stealing socks. Sometimes she writes about family, and the word doesn't sound dangerous anymore. I haven't spoken to my dad or Melissa since the day they took Olivia from school. I heard through a relative I hadn't blocked that Dad had to downsize and cancel a couple trips he'd been planning, and now he complains about me to anyone who will listen. That's fine. Complaints don't reach my front porch anymore. So tell me, was I right to cut them off? Or would you ever try reconnecting after something like that? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.